This is an introduction to the eastern hemlock, Tsuga canadensis. Hemlocks are gymnosperms. So in order to understand what that means, let's talk a little bit about the two main groups of seed plants. So gymnosperm means naked seed. The sperm part means seed, and gymno means naked. So the gymnosperms usually have a seed that comes in a cone. Usually these trees are evergreens with needles that do not drop in the wintertime. Angiosperm means vessel seed. Angio means vessel and sperm means seed. The vessel they're talking about is a flower. So flowers encase the seeds or protect the seeds. Well, actually, the seed is in the fruit that comes from the flower. So angiosperms are all the flowering plants, and in terms of trees, they are mostly broadleaf. So something like a maple leaf here, where the leaf is really broad rather than needle-like, is a broadleaf tree. And most of them, especially in temperate climates, are deciduous trees that drop their leaves during the wintertime. Here in the Northeast, water is scarce in the winter for most plants since the ground is often frozen. For plants to retain their leaves in the winter, they need to be very tolerant of low water conditions. Many of the features of the needle-like leaves of gymnosperms, such as pine trees, help conserve water. And thus, these trees are able to support leaves even through the winter. Typically in our local forests, angiosperm trees are broadleaf deciduous trees, whose leaves, as I said, are broad and flat, and are usually dropped in the fall and grow back in the spring. While gymnosperm trees are mostly evergreen conifers, whose leaves are needle-like and remain on the tree year-round. Thus, in the winter, you will notice that much less light reaches the ground beneath the evergreen conifer trees than beneath leafless, deciduous broadleaf trees. Even during the rest of the year, when deciduous leaves are present, you may notice less light penetrating the canopies of conifer trees compared to broadleaf trees. Hemlock forests have a deeper shade, shown on the left-hand side of the screen, compared to other trees, the broadleaf deciduous trees on the right-hand side of the screen. Here is a picture I took at the McLeish Field Station from one of our hemlock plots. And looking up, you can see it's pretty deep shade, even though there are some broadleaf. It's not completely 100% hemlocks in this area, but it's dominated by hemlocks in this plot. And then here is a plot almost right next door, pretty much right next door to that same plot, where there are no hemlock trees and all birch trees. So you can see that there's really a big difference. This is the same exact day, just seconds apart, taken seconds apart, just long enough for me to walk from one place to the other. You can see it's much brighter under the broadleaf deciduous trees, such as the birch trees. What is the importance of the eastern hemlock? Hemlocks are foundation species, which means they are the dominant tree in a hemlock forest. Their biomass is the highest. They're the dominant plant. They tend to be the base of the food chain because they are the dominant plant, and they are connected with many other species in a food web. They are also a late successional or climax species. So a hemlock forest is really completely dependent on having hemlocks. It's not a hemlock forest unless there are hemlocks. And as I mentioned before, they are evergreen trees that keep their needles all year. They create a very deep shade that makes the forest floor below much cooler. This makes it a good habitat to serve as winter shelter because there's less snow and in the hemlock forest on the forest floor, and this supports a very specific ecosystem. The soil in a hemlock forest also decomposes more slowly and is more acidic, and that also creates a very specific kind of ecosystem. The hemlock trees grow in cool, moist, well-drained soils, and while no animal is completely 100% dependent only on hemlocks for their food and shelter, there are many organisms that do prefer them and prefer hemlock forests in general. For example, the black-throated green warbler prefers hemlock forests. Deer get important winter shelter in hemlock forests, and native brook trout like the cooler waters found in the shade of hemlock stands. Historically, the bark of hemlock trees was used in tanning, but it's never been a particularly big commercial source of wood. It's not the best wood for a lot of products. However, because it's an important ecosystem in general, the ecosystem services that are done by the hemlock forest have been their value have been estimated at $960 per hectare per year. So there is some actual economic value that has been estimated, and that was estimated by Havel et al. In 2014. So there is some economic value just to the ecosystem services provided by hemlock forests. So what happens when hemlocks die? Generally, black birch, Betula lenta, tend to replace them. Black birch are deciduous trees with broad leaves that, as I said before, get dropped in the fall. So what if a forest of hemlocks get replaced by a forest of birch? A tree is a tree, right? Well, when we have a hemlock forest where you can see here, this is showing a bunch of, this is a forest where there's a lot of dying hemlocks. And as I said, most of them are being replaced by deciduous trees like black birch. And this really fundamentally changes the habitat, the ecosystem, because hemlock and deciduous trees like the birch are really different. The soils end up being different, the light ends up being different, the acidity of the soil, the texture of the soil, the obviously in the winter you still have shelter and shade in a hemlock forest, but you don't as much in a birch forest. So they're really different types of habitats. What is killing the hemlocks? Historically, logging was why many hemlocks died, but now most of the deaths are because of invasive insects. The most important invasive insect killing the hemlocks is the hemlock woolly adelgid, also called HWA for short, Adelgis tsugae. The adult of this insect ranges from about 0.8 millimeters to 1.5 millimeters long. It was unintentionally introduced from Osaka, Japan, to Virginia in 1950s. It got to Massachusetts in 1989. It was Springfield area where it appeared first, or at least that's where we found it first. The hemlock woolly adelgid causes the hemlock to die after about 4 to 10 years of being infected. The quicker timeline tends to happen in warmer climates. The colder it is, the longer it takes for the adelgid to kill off the hemlock. The adult lays these woolly egg masses. You can see them at the base of the needles here. And then eventually these tiny little crawler stages, these nymph stages, starts out as a crawler and then it settles at the base of a needle and goes through several other nymph stages. So these egg cases shown here are usually, the egg masses are usually about 3 millimeters in length. And inside of that, you can actually see some of what's inside of that are these little kind of brownish actual eggs. These are the eggs here. The eggs themselves are about 0.25 to 0.36 millimeters long. And then the little nymphs range in size between 0.3 to 0.5 millimeters long. So these insects are very tiny. And if there was only one insect on a plant, it would never kill the hemlock. It's the fact that usually they're all over the plant that they cause the problem. You might ask, can anything stop the hemlock woolly adelgid? One possibility is chemical control, which is not practical on a very large scale, but you can target specific trees where you can spray their needles or a chemical you pour in the soil around the base of the tree or chemical you actually inject into the tree. Chemicals that go through the tree from the soil or injected to the tree can take several years actually to get all the way to the top branches and kill off the hemlock woolly adelgid up there. The tree also has to be healthy enough to actually suck enough water with chemical in it up the tree. So a tree that's very far along, oftentimes this kind of chemical control doesn't, if it's very far along and dying, this kind of chemical control doesn't actually help because the chemical isn't able to actually get up to the top of the tree because it's not really pulling water through the plant very well, and it's not going to pull the chemical through the plant very well either. There are also some possibilities of biological control using a predator, such as these two species of beetles shown here. However, it's not a very practical method because the beetles themselves can be very expensive to raise. In some cases, it costs $1 to $2 per beetle, and you need several thousand to cover a large area because they fly away, they don't stay put on a tree or in one area. Predators may be hard to raise in the lab in very large numbers, so not only are they potentially expensive to raise, but sometimes just actually difficult to raise. Their life cycles may not sync up well in this particular environment. Also, the beetles themselves are not native and could possibly have other unintended consequences. Some hybridization between Laricopius nigrinus and native insects have been demonstrated, but the consequences of this are still being investigated. This species here, Sasagisminus tsuge, that's a hard one to say. I'm not sure how to say that genus name, but tsuge is the species epithet. That species is from Japan, and over 1.5 million have actually been released in over 100 sites in 15 eastern sites, including in Massachusetts. Laricopius nigrinus is native to British Columbia. Over 7,000 adults have been raised at 19 sites in 8 eastern states. And what they found in at least one study on that is that after releasing these beetles, it did reduce the number of hemlock woolly adelgids, but after 2 years, the hemlock woolly adelgids just came back anyway. Another possibility of stopping the hemlock woolly adelgid are cold winters. Cold temperatures can kill the hemlock woolly adelgid or cause lower reproduction. It can mean it takes longer to kill a hemlock tree. This is supported by it taking closer to 10 or even 15 years for an infested hemlock to die in Massachusetts, but only 4 to 6 years in Connecticut. This also prevents them from, the cold also prevents the insect from spreading too far north. But will the hemlock woolly adelgid be able to spread further north and kill trees in Massachusetts as the climate warms with climate change, particularly if winter temperatures get milder, which is what's predicted for this region? Research has also shown that the hemlock woolly adelgid is evolving to become more tolerant of the cold in the northern part of the range. So it's kind of a double problem. What about competition from other insects that use similar resources? Well, the elongate hemlock scale, Fiorinia externa, is another invasive, unintentionally introduced insect from Japan. It was first found in Queens, New York in 1908, and it also feeds on hemlock needles. Well, technically, hemlock woolly adelgid doesn't feed on the needles. It feeds on the parenchyma cells that are at the base of the needles, but they're both kind of in the needle area. The elongate hemlock scale is actually on the needles themselves. If the elongate hemlock scale settles on hemlocks first, it's been shown to reduce the adelgid numbers. the elongate hemlock scale can eventually kill hemlocks, but research so far suggests that the scale isn't as big of a problem for hemlocks as the adelgid is. In this photo, you can see that the adult here is a little bit larger. That scale is about 1 millimeter in length. The other small yellowish brown dots are nymphs. So over here and here, etc. Those are nymphs that are a little bit smaller. So that gives you a little overview on background of this system, and we will be exploring the system in some detail in the next several weeks.